It's chilly outside. Daylight savings is still a thing. You can't have any pudding if you don't eat your vegetables. Adults with boarding school fantasies are mad. They have practically zero boundaries at Wizarding Academy.
Well, that was random. Exceptional radio.
Yeah, so last week it was really nice, and today it's practically freezing outside.
Pseudo spring strikes again.
Yeah, and it's daylight savings time again, even though I'm pretty sure the Senate was like, yeah, let's do away with this, and the House is just like, nope.
They couldn't agree. Yeah. They have no business trying to legislate space time. These fucking idiots can't get shit right. Can't get anything right, let alone trying to legislate space time. So they need to fuck all the way out of here with this daylight saving. I feel like shit right now because of that single hour. It's so crazy how much like 1 hour it's gonna throw off the next few weeks.
Yeah.
And it's like,
the worst part about it all is that like there are, a bunch of senators that finally agreed on something that could potentially benefit everyone in the United States. And then fucking House had to ruin it for everyone. We were finally going to get rid of this hour shift that happens, twice a year because people are afraid to make a change for the better. One that science backs.
oh my God.
maybe this climate change thing is a response to daylight savings time. It's like the Earth's like, no, you guys, you've done this for too long. You got to stop.
Oh my God. It's like, it's really disconcerting. Even though you know it's coming, and like, I know for me, it's like, no matter how many times I can, well, and the lack of actual sunlight doesn't help,
Yeah.
but it just feels like I can't get enough sleep right now in terms of the mental fog that losing an hour creates. It's just so disorienting. And it's like nobody did anything. I mean, I guess there was some fucking stupid vote at some point to, I don't even know. It feels like they just did it because I don't know. In Indiana, I guess they ended up voting on it, but
Well,
it feels like it was forced on us in a way where, like the credit system,
when I
these
first
things that just
when I first moved to Indiana, daylight savings time wasn't happening here. Indiana and like Arizona,
right,
and
it held off.
there were like 3 states or something that didn't do it, and then then Indiana caved, and I guess Arizona caved eventually, right? Everyone's on daylight
everybody
savings
finally
time
caved. Yeah,
for something that really, really only impacts like the farm belt.
right.
Why do people in like, the tech industry, well, they don't even need clocks. I mean, they can just function whenever, of course, right? But but I can see why like the farm belt during a period of time when, manual labor was the name of the game, that made sense. But industrial agriculture is guided by GPS and giant machines and technicians.
And the idea of like time zones just to keep people in the notion of like, oh, your morning starts at like 5 a.m. It's a very antiquated notion of like how we should look at time. It's like whatever time it is, it doesn't, the time shouldn't have, like, the number should have nothing to do with how much light there is. And especially in using 1 through 12, like 1 through 12 for the entire day twice. It's so fucking stupid.
Well,
I mean,
24 hours isn't
military
even
time
accurate.
is better. Right. I mean, it's like, it's not even exactly it. So it's like, if the clocks were more accurate to the exact time so that we were on like 23 hours and like 57 or 58 seconds or what it actually is, then our like satellites would be more accurate, our fucking GPS devices would be more accurate. And because even then the satellites have to adjust for relativity, so there's like mathematic
atomic drift
adjustment. Yeah, there's adjustments that have to be made concerning relativity to make sure that all the clocks stay in line. But time zones just make it worse in terms of like adding an extra variable concerning, like, right now, if it's 2:05 here, there's no reason it has to be 2:05 in the morning on the other side of the planet.
Well,
like they could have a different.
I think Indiana is like Indiana and like the Upper Peninsula of Michigan are like the westernmost portions of the Eastern Standard Time Zone, and we're actually further west than the easternmost most portions of the Central Standard Time Zone. The time zones are all weird. They're not drawn on like well, they just don't make sense. They're practically drawn on territorial lines or geographic lines as opposed to, accurately dividing the earth into time zones.
Well, and it's like I understand the notion of like trying to keep conventions, but again, this is where we're at a point in time where we're actually keeping the pre-electrical grid industrial conventions for the sake of tradition, thinking that that's the superior way of like coordinating, when in reality, if like everybody went off the same clock, then it would be like near impossible to like fuck up a meeting.
Well, you'd think it would be.
Especially, I mean, it's on the person.
Yeah.
I mean, at that point, it's completely on the person. But it's like, if it's like we have a meeting at 1:30 and there's no like time zone change, it's at 1:30. Like whether it's in the morning for me or the afternoon for somebody else.
Oh yeah.
It doesn't matter. It's at that time, and it's like, it sounds so foreign. Like they've tried to do it in terms of like Greenwich Mean Time, but then they'll be like, I'm Greenwich Mean Time +4, because then they move the time zone with the like light.
Yeah.
And it's like moving the time with the light is so antiquated. It's like, again, it's under the assumption that we don't have like electricity or something. And I'm sure
we're all waiting for what is it, Helios or Apollo or something like that, right, to ride the chariot.
Yeah, that's what it feels like. And it's like, I'm sure there's a lot of systems that are now dependent upon that time zone change, but it's like they could be built without that dependency. That it would be a huge shift now, of course. So it's not even really like I'm presenting that as if I think it's possible to make that shift. It's more so it's things like that we don't question about our society, and it's things like the way the toilet hasn't been like innovated. There's a lot of things that we don't innovate in exchange for the perception that innovating in these other areas is like actually moving forward into the future. But it's like, who cares if we have 3D hologram interactive televisions if the toilet is like the same inefficiency 300 years later? And it's like, obviously, or not obviously, hopefully that won't be the case. But knowing that like some of the innovations in toilets have been like, oh, we have to do lower flow because California doesn't have enough water, or like here's a new bidet or something that's not really like,
or the really space age ones that are coming out of Japan with like the built-in bidet and the dryer, the one that lift the lid for you and plays soft music and change the lighting, and the smart toilets. I think that's the new frontiers. We're in the bells and whistle phase of the toilet.
Right.
They can't actually improve the toilet any more than it already is. It works as good as it's going to get.
No, it doesn't in terms of like...
Oh, the ones we have. Like,
no, they don't, because we're not using we're just flushing that shit and not turning it into anything like energy. And
I think
this
that's
is what I'm saying.
Toilet.
That's what I'm saying. Is we're stuck in this notion of like, oh, once something is excrement, it's waste.
Okay.
Whereas in other systems,
I see what you're talking about. Yeah, no.
Yeah,
what I'm saying is the toilets that we have.
Our shit. We're not using our piss.
Yeah.
We're not turning that into energy or any other. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be energy. There should be something else that should be able to be used for, but we're not even doing that as a society. Is my point.
Well, I think that applies to a lot of things. I think the current version of the can that we have, for what people want to do with it, it's as good as it gets. We get like luxury toilets now, but I see what you're saying. It should also be like the Mr. Coffee from Back to the Future. It should be a fusion generator.
Yes, what we're doing now is effectively no different from somebody having a chamber pot and tossing it out the window. We're not much different. It's just a controlled chamber pot toss.
Isn't there a power plant in Africa that like turns like excrement into like bricks, water? It's not
the only one.
And electricity. Like, I mean, I know there are several, but like I remember reading about one specifically. They were turning out carbon bricks that were suitable for construction. They were creating water, like potable water and electricity. And like that was it. that was their pollutant output was consolidated bricks of carbon that were functional for construction purposes, and electricity and water.
So now it looks like companies are starting to do turning human waste into fuel to heat homes, which is like within the last year that started happening, or like around 2016 is when they started proposing it as like a theoretical framework, and then oh god, but
so
of course somebody has to take it and go into cryptocurrency.
So that's like one of those things. A few weeks ago I was kind of down this rabbit hole of like stoves, like efficient stoves that burn wood or pretty much anything. They're called gasification stoves. And what they do is they rely on generating enough heat to essentially vaporize whatever hydrocarbons are present in a material, and use that as the ignition for whatever's in there. And then everything just is rendered as carbon. Like, and when done right, it pretty much burns it up into nothing. Like the most minimal amount of ash is left at the end. And so these things can be used to generate heat, of course, and heat an entire house, cook, boil water, create steam, generate electricity. There are gasification stoves that can push like piston engines or turn generators and alternators, things like that. So it's actually possible to burn shit, just burn it, and actually burn it very cleanly once you arrive at the correct pressure and heat and all of those things. But it turns into a reliable fuel. And now the only problem, of course, is that when it's not done right, it is absolutely like 100% carbon emission pollution. But once it's up to temperature, it's great. So as long as it can keep it running. Oh man, that's a lot of shit though.
But there's constant. That's the like one thing that is constant.
That's true.
And that's where I mean in terms of like, it's one of them. There's only a few things that are guaranteed.
Piss and shit
as
and
a
death.
Species. Yes, those are the few things that are guaranteed. And sometimes they happen at the same time. So it's like, there's this element of, again, they're like society and especially the pharmaceutical company or companies have made it. It's easy to get wrapped up in the notion that you can take some sort of medicine or some sort of pill to alleviate any illness or any potentially life-threatening ill. And by proxy, we've started to move on. And that's where I mean, it's like there are things that are happening that are like allowing us to mentally move on. Because even in terms of like the notion of having the luxury time to like argue about stuff on the internet is like a very there's like a level of luxury that has to happen in order for somebody to actually have the time to argue on the internet. But when you are doing it, it's like you're simultaneously acknowledging that you have not many problems to worry about in reality, but at the same time, they're are things that people should be worried about, but escapism is so like normalized that it's like easier to constantly be in escapist mode and then justifying that because things are legitimately in a place where we should be worried. And at the same time, again, people will go online and argue about that instead of actually doing anything about it. So it's like a weird, everybody's bourgeoisie in a way, not necessarily because of their own fault in terms of like, when you have internet activism, it does feel like you are doing something, and to a degree, it is like there's a lot of internet sanitization that needs to take place. Where, like for example, on Twitter, I see a lot of anti-Semitism. I've seen more anti-Semitism now than ever. And the issue I'm also seeing is if you report anti-Semitism, Twitter's not necessarily going to remove it. And it's not the same for like anti-Asian hate or anti-Black hate. Like if somebody does some even covert anti-Asian hate and they're not like clear using slurs against a specific Asian group, but are like any sort of like indicating violence towards Asian people, any sort of Asian in terms of like the entire spectrum, whether it's like Indian or like Laotian, like any sort of anti-Asian hate, you can probably get it taken down. And that's what I mean. It's the same with anti-Black. Like people use coded language so that they're not saying the N-word and they can get around the terms of service. But even that coded language, you can like get taken down when it's like anti-Black because it's kind of obvious. But the anti-Semitic stuff, it's not really getting taken down. And I see it in terms of like when you try to counteract this force on the internet, it can feel like you're doing some sort of activism, but it's more so like fishing in the ocean and like removing a couple sharks from the entire ocean. So it's not to say that you're not doing something, but that cause is not really one that is like a winnable battle just by the very nature of the size. Cause like, then you go somewhere else. Like I'll go to pirate like sports sites, and the chat boxes are like just looking at like one exchange, it like burns your brain with some of the most hateful shit that you've ever seen that you won't see on Twitter, because then you're like, oh, they are getting some stuff off, because it's like there's this level of like, again, I'm definitely not going to repeat any of the stuff because it's like they'll go at like gay people, Jewish people, Asian people, Black people, all in one sentence. And you're like, what would possess this 13-year-old boy, because I know that's who it is, to say something shit like, and it's like the edgelord internet culture is worse in places where it's not moderated. So it's like to the point where a lot of people don't even end up in those places. And I don't blame them, but seeing the like, you know, there's like Stormfront, there's 4chan, there's 8chan, there's Twitter, and then there's like completely
Twitter using the same statement as 8chan, Stormfront, and 4chan. That's like a death sentence, man. Seriously.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
and again, it's like
that's like the
social media is clearly dying.
Oh yeah, it is. Yeah, I mean, last week I was complaining about not recognizing any of the names of the recent crop of high-level engineers and department heads who lost their jobs, and then the guy that the guy who got canned because Elon decided to breach terms of HR and disclose his medical condition to the world on Twitter. Like, I don't think. I mean, I can't even think of any other company except for like the pillow guy, who's crazy, obviously, who've managed to like completely ruin a company so quickly, and all they have to do is open their mouth. Like, what was they closed off their API to third party unless they want to pay, and it broke half of Twitter's ability to display images.
Yeah, that was a pretty funny period.
That's one of those what the crap's going on moments, because that's kind of what Twitter does when they share things now. It's kind of basically just an image now. Half the tweets that I see are actually just screen clippings of other tweets. They're not even attempting to retweet.
Well, and it's funny you say that in terms of like, I feel as if people are starting to not put their content out there because of the way that thievery happens.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you remember when the TikTok like black dancer boycott started.
Oh yeah.
But there hasn't been any like new dances in a while since that shit happened. Mm-hmm. And I feel like it's still going because I don't see any like the last time I've seen white TikTok dancing go viral was those two dudes that were like, I think they're Canadian or some shit. And it's like they're out in a it's like a carnival or some shit, and they're doing a little pop lock, and you know they're good. They're not great, but it's you can totally see the quality of TikTok dancer just fell off a cliff because they didn't have anybody to steal from, and it's like, you know, it's not just black breakdancers. There's like a ton of Japanese breakdancers,
Korean breakdancers, and
Korean for sure. But the Korean is it's complex in terms of like the appropriation that's happening with the Korean stuff is mixed in terms of like some of them are very much open about connecting to black culture, and some of them are just stealing and like not connecting. Yeah. So it's not a homogenous appropriation across like the Korean front, and that's why it's like you'll find some really like strong like Black Lives Matter supporting BTS army people, but then you'll find some that are like breakdancers, but they also they'll use the N-word. So it's like, you know, you can't give everybody who's in Korea the same benefit of the doubt because it's a very complex scene. And it's also like, it's not as like the Japanese culture has a lot of racism, but you're not necessarily going to find that in like the breakdance culture, which is why it's like, it's different. It's different within the different contexts. And especially for a black person to like experience those things, like from a black person's perspective, you have to be very careful about. There is like a lot of gatekeeping of culture that like needs to happen for the sake of not in the same way that Eminem is one of the biggest rappers ever. It's because Elvis and Eminem is the standard. Like, if like a black person creates something, a white person will come in and steal that shit if they let them. And America will not fucking care and will not reward that black person like posthumously in terms of like, it's just, it's happened across so many fields, like that movie about the ladies at NASA. It's like, yeah, that's a little fucking late. And, I mean, there was a couple of them are still alive. I mean, maybe all of them are still alive when they. But regardless,
Buzz Aldrin refused to launch until like she finished the math.
The idea that could happen and that those ladies didn't get recognized by the public till like decades later, that's like par for the course for black people, which is also why, in terms of like the notion of selling out has a deeper meaning than just about, it's not about the money, it's about selling out the culture. Like Chris Rock, for example, when he turns around and is like, oh, you're not supposed to fight. My mom said never fight in front of white people, while doing this to a mainly white audience. Well, that's like the definition of selling out in terms of this person who got big from a black audience and then quote unquote crossed over, because that was a goal for a lot of people, is to become like crossover. Like one of the biggest crossovers is Snoop Dogg. And it's wild to see him become like, you know, he's got cereal on the shelves now, when at one point this dude was on trial for multiple murders, or in multiple trials for murder. In some cases, it wasn't even like, yeah, he definitely was there, he just didn't pull the trigger. So it's like, it wasn't even like, this dude is definitely involved in criminal activities when he was younger. Now, cereal on the shelf. So, like,
man, I didn't.
It's crossover, but there's various times where you'd be like, oh, Snoop is selling out, but it wasn't really in terms of, it's not the same thing.
So he's got like a reggae album and cereal, and he makes cookies on TV with Martha Stewart. His transformation into a Muppet was so seamless, like so transparent. Like we didn't even notice it happening. He's a character now. He's transcended rapper.
He always was though. He always was a character.
Yeah, I know, but he's like really fully.
Calvin Brodus is not Snoop Dogg.
Yeah,
Snoop Dogg is a character.
But Snoop Dogg,
Calvin Brodus is the real person.
Snoop Dogg has cereal and makes cookies on TV with Martha Stewart. He's totally a Muppet now. It's great. Like, I mean, it's great if everyone could admit that, but I don't think that's the case. I think that people still want to pretend that Snoop Dogg is Snoop D-O-double-G, you know, walking into the party with a handful of rubbers and a big bag of weed. I heard that
Snoop's got grandkids.
Dude, I heard that he got high with Willie Nelson one time, and Willie smoked him under the table, and he said he couldn't smoke with Willie anymore.
Yeah, which, you know,
Willie Nelson is also a Muppet, because anybody who has that kind of energy that far into life, that's something to be admired. Like, bravo, anyone with that kind of go power.
Man. And yeah, which there is this element of, as you get older, to keep the same type of energy, you have to shift the activities. So it's like,
yeah,
the idea of like Snoop Dogg being 50 whatever years old, rolling into clubs with guns on his waist and like drinking Hennessy and partying all night, and then like shooting out with people. It's like, why would he? That doesn't even, that sounds like sad. And I think the notion of like not allowing people to have a trajectory that gets out of that when they're young. Like as a prospect, it limits what everybody else can become in terms of like, I don't think Snoop, he clearly didn't let that limit him, which is where, you know, he's done more than a lot of other rappers / actors.
He's done a lot more than a lot of humans in general.
Right, just in general. But I mean in terms of like the capacity to take that young teenage angst that you can put on a record and not get deluded into thinking that you can do that for fucking 40 years. You can't be a young angsty teenager on record for 40 years. It just doesn't work. And that's where I mean, like, Kurt Cobain couldn't do it. Fucking Snoop Dogg can't do it.
Even Dr. Dre made a love rap album. Yeah. That was that one solo album.
Well, Dr. Dre, what was it? Once he left Death Row, it's like his actual rap career fell off fairly quickly.
Yeah, that's true. But he also made that love rap album that was kind of terrible.
I don't even remember which one you're talking about.
Maybe it was only one song that was like a love rap song. I just remember hearing it and thinking, this wasn't Snoop, or this wasn't Dr. Dre. And I was wrong. It was.
But yeah, Eminem basically revived Dre's rap career in terms of like, it was like what, Been There, Done That was the one after his Bomb album that I can't recall. I could Google it, but that ruins the notion of like, yeah, he released this album that was like co-starring people and him producing and rapping on a few, and it was just terrible. But again, it's like he thought he was deluded by his own hype at that point, and that's where he went back and figured out what made him good. And it was like, oh, I need somebody young and angsty alongside me, and that's what makes me good. And when he got Eminem, then he was the old Dre. He was better than the old Dre, because the old Dre just has Snoop Dogg and NWA, whereas now he's got Snoop Dogg, NWA, Eminem, 50 Cent, fucking The Game. It's some, you know, there's all these people that once Eminem brought back the old Dre, he even says it on some track, you know.
Yeah.
It's like Eminem knows he's like revived Dre from the dead, basically.
But doesn't Dr. Dre say I'm back a whole bunch or something like that?
I mean, Forgot About Dre is obviously a whole song, but what I mean is there's multiple tracks where Eminem alludes to like Dre's career falling off and makes fun of it, but also alludes to him being the force, rightfully, that revived Dre's actual creative output.
Yeah.
So that's where I mean, like, there are elements of acknowledging like that one has to, like, if you're gonna, they made Chronic and then they made Chronic 2001. Both of them sold well, and it wasn't even about selling. Both were like critically received well. So it's like the only way you can do that is to acknowledge that you're no longer the young Dr. Dre and you're the old Dr. Dre, and you have to like take that into account and change the sound, and at the same time try to not forget who that person was. He did that really well, probably through the use of ghostwriters, you know. So there's this element of, I'm sure he had some ear in the final product. But one of the issues is specifically with people like Dr. Dre, you don't know where their ghostwriters start and where them like being the critical ear ends. Like the final product, you know, they had a critical ear in. It's more so the difference between Dre in 1996 that couldn't hire ghostwriters versus the one in like 2001. It's, you know,
where people are lining up to work with them.
Yeah, the production is very different in terms of like Scott Storch clearly had a lot of input or influence, but then you can tell Eminem was like in there learning, because when he goes and produces his own shit, it sounds like that similar level of quality of production, but it's got Eminem's unique ear to it. So there are these things happening around Dr. Dre that then go to define the industry. So I'm not saying that Eminem doesn't deserve to like be acclaimed at the top of hip hop, because he is really influential. But I think what Melly Mel was trying to say is like, if he wasn't white, Eminem would have had to be better than he is to have been put where he is, in terms of like, there's times where Eminem's music was like not perfect, and it was definitely subpar, and his audience was willing to give him more leeway than a black audience would with a black artist, which is why I think there is this element of, it's a lot more difficult. And again, there's only one Eminem. So it's like, it's not to say that people like Machine Gun Kelly or like Peanut Butter Wolf or fucking LP can't come in as rappers and make good music as white artists. It's just to achieve the level of acclaim in hip hop that Eminem has, like,
man, they're gonna have to work with Dr. Dre.
Exactly. And that was like a special moment in time, which is probably never gonna happen again.
Yeah.
So that's why I think there are these things in terms of like, there are moments in time where things can happen that won't be able to happen again. Like, there has to be a producer, and it may be Dre again when he starts making music with more involvement directly, as to when that type of musician emerges again. So that's where, I mean, like, you got the Kendrick Lamar, but it's the same story. So if there's gonna be another new thing that's not associated with that group, it's not gonna be the product of like one artist. It's gonna be like a perfect storm of production, the artist and the audience. And so that's where, I mean, like, it becomes really, I think, the timing of hip hop's growth, it's like impossible not to talk about Eminem and compare him to Elvis, because he did it himself too. In terms of like, it's the most clear comparison of, you can't call what Eminem did stealing, in terms of like, he immersed himself in the culture, which is why the culture accepted him. So I think that's the difference between him and like Elvis in terms of appropriation, which is where, again, like, I look at a lot of the Korean like appropriation, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is fine, because these people are like actually immersing themselves in like all parts of the culture, like the dance and the like protest and the activism. Whereas the ones that just want to like take the dance and the music and like act like the people don't exist, it's like a completely different type of theft and appropriation, which is where I'm very cognizant of it. And it's like, China's even more complex, because it's like such a very big place that you get all those types and even more that are like You'd have to probably get more context to understand what's actually happening.
Yeah, at 1.4 billion people to even just speak of the Chinese as a homogeneous entity is already just inviting the weirdest kind of criticism.
Right. Yeah. Because I've listened to multiple, like I've listened to Chinese rap and I've listened to Filipino rap, and it's like, it's good. It's not to say that any of it is even like, or at least to my ear.
It's got to be really tough in China where they like really crack down on any kind of political dissent.
Right, I'm sure.
That's like that's like half.
That's
of
the context.
Yeah.
But then that's where like knowing that it allows one to like look at the expression and be like, okay, yeah, this is less likely to have political activism involved because the government would literally ban them if it was like super obvious. So I'm not gonna
unless they're like
them for like not being activists.
Unless they're like fuck UK. and
well, but
that's some like really old tension. Like, that'd be some really old tension they'd be trying to thrive on, and that's probably that's
not going to connect with like the hip hop audience.
No, not at all.
Where you don't see it, so that's where like that type of stuff wouldn't have
state sanctioned
resonated anyway. So I wasn't political rap. that particular struggle. It made sense to not really put it in the music. So that's why I'm, giving those different contexts. It is like you want to be, you don't want to gatekeep for the wrong reasons, but then you have to gatekeep because then you get like shit where, for example, African American vernacular English will get called internet slang, and then you'll see people using it incorrectly, and it's like you can either try to reclaim the words or you can like leave it and move on to other words, but it happens so much where you see language getting stolen, you see the foods getting stolen, you see the dances getting stolen, and then the people that create these things not getting credit for it. So that's where I'm completely okay with gatekeeping, in the context of like knowing that people will steal shit and profit and not even give credit to the person they stole it from. I am seeing less creativity online, and it feels like the internet version of the writer's strike and the effects that it had, and where the internet is trying to like do its reality show shit and then make it seem like it can exist without the Black creators. But it's clearly losing a lot of the actual content edge that was keeping people around, and it's just being replaced with racism. And that's where Elon's Twitter is not fun. It's just, I'm going to encounter some racists. I'm going to encounter some angry dude saying some dumb shit, not some TikTok dance, not some skit, and go other places for those things now.
One of the things that really bothers me about Twitter, and the reason that I don't have an account, is that there are some really smart people on Twitter. I'm not going to lump them all together, but there are enough people that ruin it for me, and it seems that the common theme is that these users attempt to wield sarcasm, and half the time they don't succeed, And if they can't wield sarcasm, then they never rise to the level of cynicism or satire. It doesn't actually become funny when it's just words on the internet, because without actual engagement, sarcasm is just bullying. And so I see people essentially arguing with what amounts to, I mean, they're not imaginary because somebody on some other keyboard is entering information, but to the person reading it, they have no connection to that person. When I see people arguing on the internet, I wonder, is like, how well do these people actually know each other? Have they actually been in each other's like physical presence? Did they go to the other's house for like coffee and play chess or something like that? And it's crazy because I see it anytime I open a thread on Reddit or Twitter or foolishly enter Facebook and just start reading. I always end up finding some pair of fools on the internet arguing over keystrokes. And I have no doubt that they do not know each other in real life.
Oh yeah. Well, and it's like, I know.
Is that what the internet is for people? It's just a place to go argue with other people where there are fewer repercussions?
Without basically anymore, because that's all I ever hear people doing on it, and nothing of actual productive substance.
There are websites still that have like recipes, and that stuff's cool sometimes, but social media has just devolved into the dungeon. The dungeon forms that we all tried to get away from in the early days, when you actually had to know of a forum to find it, not just stumble into it with Facebook or Twitter.
Yeah. Well, and even YouTube's output is starting to like look the same in terms of like, it's all the same looking guy, talking head, the glasses, nerdy, you know, neck beard, fucking I see the content and the discussion homogenizing, and I am optimistic that it's like it has to change in the sense of like, I feel like the people who aren't that cesspool toxic person are going to end up leaving or going somewhere or doing some other shit. And it's like, once all those people are, yeah, it is kind of being bullied off of social media in a way of like, if you're not willing to be angry and engage in a conflict, you're basically not welcome anywhere. So that is not going to be able to persist. So all the people who are like eventually bullied off of social media, I don't think they're necessarily going to congregate into a single place. But I think
internet trolls exist everywhere, though.
Oh, for sure. But I mean, I think those people aren't going to be on the internet. Yeah. So I think there's actually going to be a wave of activism that's about to happen in the next couple of years because people are being bullied off the internet. Like, a lot of the people who were just like wasting time, like casually surfing the internet, are no longer going to be able to casually surf because it's too toxic. And those people by proxy are like, they're not just going to sit and watch Netflix in terms of, because Netflix stopped producing as much content. They're like shutting down the animation studio and like not doing anything but transphobic fucking right-wing angry comedy specials. So at a certain point, these places are trying to get the right-wing audience and also not caring about what is not like anybody, you don't have to be left wing, anybody but the right, like the far right, those people are going to be pushed away because there's actually a lot of like Republican people who are not far right, which is hilarious to think about. But like a lot of them don't want to be associated with the transphobes and the homophobes and like the fucking racist people because they're not actually like hateful. They just quote unquote think of themselves as socially or fiscally responsible, and the popular culture understanding is that Republicans are fiscally responsible because they don't want to spend money on social programs. So those people will identify and vote Republican.
Right, because they're no
they don't
liberal
want to
people
be
with
associated
money.
with Nazis. Right. And that's you know, realistically, I can understand that. If I don't have kids and I have a lot of money, if I'm a small-minded person, it makes sense as to why I shouldn't pay for the schools.
Yeah.
Eventually, you're going to have to interact with those children when they become adults or become part of the economy. So it's like that person needs to actually ensure that the local children grow up to become productive citizens so that they're not stealing from them. But that's like the indirect result of tax dollars, which people are not good at seeing indirect results in America. So that's where I'm like, I can't even blame that person who wants to see direct results for not wanting to put money towards school if they don't have children or something stupid like that.
I don't know, man. I don't have kids, and I don't want to live in a world full of idiots.
But look, that's fine. I don't either. But that person also doesn't want to be seen as a Nazi. And I don't think that the Republic, like the far right wing, are actually taking into account that those people don't hate black people that much. They don't hate gay people that much. They don't hate trans people that much. And the openly vocal ones are just really loud. And it's making it seem like a bunch of Republicans look like and sound like this, when in reality, a lot of them have those people in their families. So they don't want to be seen as that person. So I'm like, I'm looking at this happening and I'm actually anticipating a way different, like the elections that are coming up. There's definitely not only is there not going to be a red wave, I feel like we're going to see the Marjorie Taylor Greens and the like openly phobic people. They'll win in some of the races, but they're not going to be like the main part of the Republican Party. I feel like the Republican Party is like on a correction to be like the Mitt Romneys and the I guess Mitt Romney is like the most
he's the most reasonable Republican left.
The only one I can think of.
Well,
really.
Liz Cheney got the boot, so
yeah. But like I said, you know, knowing especially that the George Santos type is basically about to get outlawed because they're realizing that it's legal to just lie your way to a position in government. They're moving to make that not as easy to do again, mainly because he's not cooperating with the main part of the Republicans. So that's where I'm like, there's a fracture happening within their party, and it's been happening since the Tea Party.
Well,
but
like,
also
even like Nikki Haley, she just announced her I think she announced her bid for the campaign, and she kind of broke ranks with Trump, who was her boss when she was our UN representative. And she actually has like kind of, technically she has international diplomacy experience. Technically, but whether that actually translates to anything meaningful is different. But I think that there's I think you're right. I think we're about to see like a landscape shift within conservative politics. Because while there is this kind of embedded I'm not sure what to call the Tea Party anymore. It's definitely something else. But you're right. They don't represent the body of conservative America at all. They're like a finger or maybe a hand. They're like the hand that nobody is paying attention to till now. We can cut the hand off, right?
Yeah, and also, it's happening under Biden, but a lot of the policies that Trump enacted are negatively affecting like right-wing America that is already segregated or self-segregated. So like, the East they call it Palestine. Hearing the local people say it's not East Palestine, it's East Palestine, apparently, because Americans are fucking idiots. But the people who steal names and just fuck them up completely are now being harmed by their own capitalist, I can't call them brethren, but they're capitalist overlords, because they thought the Norfolk train companies would be in their corner because they support capitalism blindly. But now that they're finding out that capitalism does not love them and does not care, they're not, I don't know how quickly they're going to change their tunes, but a lot of them are going to die because capitalism doesn't care and will pollute their towns and have them sick and unable to vote. And it doesn't, it's this element of when you are a constituent that is sold out, you don't know it until everything's falling down around you. And that's where it's falling down around a lot of them. And they're trying to put it off on Biden. But when they try to lean on capitalism to save them, capitalism looks down at them and says no. And at this point, they are realizing that this thing that they created, it will eat them up. And I know there's going to be people that double down and triple down and quadruple down, but I'm seeing a lot of those people in terms of like the ones that actually are suffering. They're questioning the system now, and it's not like this all Biden. It's they know the train companies are the ones that are polluting, and it's like they don't believe the lies anymore because they've been affected by them. And once so many white people are affected by destructive capitalism, a significant percentage of them will no longer be able to deny it. Even though there's going to be, like I said, there's definitely going to be the ones that love it like the Jesus Christ that they invented and will forever die on that hill thinking that it cares about them. But a lot of them are changing their tune. And like I said, a lot of these Republicans, they don't want to be associated with the Alex Jones and the Tucker Carlsons and the, it's effectively the right-wing Nazi boomers. And as loud as those Nazis are, I'm looking around and I'm feeling like they're actually outnumbered by what is at this point centrist Republicans. Because I guess if you're to the left of the,
I think it's also some Gen Xers fall into this category too.
Oh, for sure. Definitely a lot, probably more than not.
The Gen X created the edgelord, so
yeah,
and
definitely Gen X.
And this one can't all be the boomers. There's definitely a big Gen X hand involved.
Gen X is like a weird demographic because they were like the first politically impotent generation to like effectively tap out. Because the hippies didn't really tap out in terms of like, they didn't do anything effective. They just weren't giving up altogether. So it's like, I feel like there is this apathy that is born
hippies
from
kind of gave up at the end of the Summer of Love in 1967.
Oh, definitely. And, you know, towards the end, definitely, but not towards the beginning is what I'm getting at. I feel like Gen X gave up towards the beginning because of the Cold War and like the constant threat of nuclear like apocalypse. And once they were desensitized to that, that's why the subsequent generations were never like shaken into like, well, that's not necessarily true. So I thought it was really strange in post 2000 or post 9/11. I saw people who I thought were rational human beings like affected by propaganda in a way that I didn't think. It wasn't a bunch of people. It was like enough to keep the war going, but it was like people at private school who I thought would never be so dumb to be affected by propaganda or some shit like that, in a way where I'm like, it's not about being stupid. It's about being vulnerable or willing to go along with it in a way where somebody who's in a private school in high school to go and volunteer for war is like an acknowledgement that society's nepotism is something that they can throw away if they want to. And in the process, it's like, once you throw that nepotism away and become a soldier, you can use the fact that you threw the nepotism away as a means of like furthering yourself. So it's like a really disingenuous discarding of the nepotistic path. Yet I digress. I didn't think private school kids would be like subject to being swayed by that propaganda, but they were. So on the one hand, I feel like the majority of people had learned a resistance to the government antagonism in the form of propaganda that jaded Gen X and then effectively made a lot of our generation completely desensitized to any sort of like prodding. But there was people who responded to it in a way where I feel like that group got smaller, and it's getting smaller. It hasn't gone away completely. But they're always the ones with guns, and they're always the loudest. So it makes it seem like there's a lot of them anytime that they exist. And that's where, like, even when there was like a rush to join the military after 9/11, it wasn't actually that many people. If you look at the size of the U.S. military post 9/11, it grew, but proportion to like the rest of the country, it's not actually that many people. So on the one hand, when things like balloon out of proportion, like there's a ton of incels right now. Nazism is clearly on the rise, but it's actually not that many people. They're just really loud and obnoxious and really visible. So this is where it's like left-wing, not even left-wing, centrist, pretend left-wing media also depends upon those people to make itself relevant. So those things are going to make it seem like it's also worse than it actually is. So it's like, on the one hand, you're not going to find many left-wing organizations who aren't like, you need to be getting guns right now and arm yourselves against the transphobes. And it's like, that's because they want to stay relevant just the same as the right wing. Because I see a lot of that shit happening too, where I'm like, these are the same coin.
But these people so absurd.
Oh, of course, of course.
It sounds so absurd. Like this, they just say. I mean, I know it's absurd, but like when I hear it aloud, it's like it becomes even more absurd. Like,
but what's happened is capitalism has done this trick where it creates a systematic push for individuals to feel responsible for counteracting a systematic problem, whether it's transphobia, whether it's systematic racism, whether it's misogyny, whether it's like any sort of ism. Capitalism has effectively and covertly made the individual feel responsible for fighting as an individual at every opportunity, at any given opportunity, which would also burn that person out, which is part of the strategy. It doesn't encourage judicious activism. It encourages constant overreaction and overreactivism and constant outrage. Like, it depends upon outrage, but will then tell you that it hates cancel culture. Meanwhile, Roseanne and Chris Rock are making entire sets about outrage and cancel culture.
Roseanne's still active? Man.
Yeah. So this machine has become murderously efficient at stealing things, co-opting them, undermining their meaning, and repackaging them as if they still have the same meaning as when they stole it. Which is why people buy Che Guevara t-shirts.
From Walmart, made in China.
From Walmart, made in China. There you go. So there's this element, or like people buy Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. posters and hang them on their wall, sold at Walmart or sold at some
gas
place
station
that has no, a gas station, wherever, has no connection to that family or the actual movement. And it's like that same system will tell you that there is no ethical consumption, so you might as well unethically consume, which is part of the trick in terms of like, it lies and makes you think you have to consume instead of producing your own thing. And it has co-opted even individual production. So as if you're producing something as an individual, well, are you monetizing it? You need to share it with us. You can't produce something for yourself. You have to share it with the world and let us take 90% and you get 10% of that thing that you're actually producing now. 97%. You know what? 98%. We're going to take 98% because what choice do you have? Now you got to deal with us or else nobody will see it. And then they make you feel like you can't just make something for yourself anymore. Because if you're not monetizing it, then why are you even bothering to make it?
I'm pretty sure that's why it's called art, though.
But what is art if it's not worth anything?
Art exists for itself.
That's what the schools say, but you have to pay to go to those schools to learn that lesson. So anybody who hasn't gone to art school isn't going to have paid for the lesson to learn that art, for the sake of art, is what art should be, because it's behind a paywall.
That actually is a fairly high concept.
It is. And that specific lesson is not only behind a paywall, it's behind multiple paywalls because you're not getting that lesson in 101. That lesson is like a third or fourth year or graduate lesson in terms of like, because that gets to modern art. You have to go through Renaissance. You have to go through fucking Impressionism. You have to go through before you get to Dadaism and other things that actually get to that point, because art wasn't art for the sake of art yet.
It was son or daughter of an artist who did that already.
Sistine Chapel was not art for the sake of art.
Oh no, that was decorative.
That's not how art worked up until modernity. So even you have to have multiple paywalls that you go through to get to modern art as a lesson in terms of art for the sake of art. So nobody is actually getting that lesson unless they go through 17 paywalls. Which, do people need that specific lesson? Maybe, probably.
I think our art, the general quality of art would probably not change.
How many people actually make art? How many people actually consume art?
Yeah.
How many people consume pseudo art that is just a mere impression or a copy that is for the sake of getting money? And I feel like if you look at America, it's mostly the latter, which is why the art
very well applied to artistic design principles for commerce.
And you get the AI artists, and you get the AI musicians, and you get the AI writers, and it works for now, but eventually that's going to cave in on itself in a way that
speaking of AI writers
doesn't care.
Speaking of AI writers, there's the most recent episode of South Park. They used AI to generate significant portions of the dialogue in an effort to demonstrate, like, hey, this might not be a good idea. And it was the first South Park episode I've watched in over a decade where I actually enjoyed it because they showed people digging big pits for themselves and falling into it because they relied on AI, or what they thought was an AI. And of course, at the end, the school hires some like backwoods shaman to like scare the AI out of people. And of course, that's not how it works. Man, people aren't reading. They don't write for themselves anymore. Relying on AI. We're going to end up with a group of computer users who are all idiots. It's like the worst forecast.
Well, so much of the internet was already bots before.
Yeah.
Like I think it was like 40% of internet traffic was from bots before people are using AI assistants. And that's where I'm like, what do regular people need AI assistants for? You know what I mean? At this point, there's this notion of like, oh, everybody needs a HAL 9000. But for what? Is like everybody's daily routine becomes so difficult that now they need an AI assistant to figure out what times of day they're going to play video games.
I mean,
what times of day they're going to eat.
I disabled all of the machine learning features of iOS because I don't need it learning what I'm doing. I know exactly what I'm doing. I tell it what to do. It doesn't remind me what to do. That's not what a smartphone does. Smartphones are only as smart as the user. And if we start relying on the device for our intelligence, oh man, that's like even worse than not reading and not learning how to write. It's like, this is the illusion of intelligence. I guess that's why it's artificial. It's fake intelligence. Oh, I've got artificial intelligence. I remember a few years ago, machine learning was all over every tech publication that existed. Machine learning this, machine learning that. This new video card takes advantage of machine learning, or machine learning can use this chip to heighten capability, all this crap. I don't know anybody, maybe you, and maybe I think I might know 5 people you and myself and maybe 3 other people who could actually do something in the machine learning microcosm for personal endeavors. But I can't think of anything that any of us would actually do with it outside of like an actual development environment. Not a home computer system environment, but like, I don't know anybody who has a full-scale dev environment at home. Who actually does real machine learning development at home? No one.
Yeah.
Like the idea that we can bake it into our phones and it's going to improve life, that's just the machine learning how to sell us shit, basically. There's a lot to technology that seems to be all about selling the idea of, oh yeah, now you have this ability. And it's like just having the ability is somehow improving the capability, the total system capability. But if it's never utilized, then is it actually an improvement? Or is it just some kind of vestigial component that's wasted? One of the biggest reasons I haven't pushed forward on, I finally updated one of my computers to Windows 11 because it can. But I don't really see a need to upgrade my other computer systems because none of the software that I use relies on new instruction sets that require me to get a new processor of any kind. And I don't have a computer that feels slow. I mean, I've used some blazing fast computers that are just like faster than lightning, but I don't feel like that's actually necessary for the kinds of computer utilization that I engage in. It's just I'm not that computer user. And so even technology to me at some point it's just like, why are they packing all this extra crap in it? Who's actually using this? Because it's definitely not like the base user group who just
right.
They're just playing swipey games and fondling the glass slab. That's like, that user is definitely not engaging in machine learning. They're teaching the machine, though, for sure.
Yeah, because like you said, I'm just trying to figure out what activities people are doing that aren't shopping, arguing, or
arguing about shopping.
Yeah, or filling out an Excel spreadsheet, because that's where I'm like, there's only so many activities you can actually do in a fucking internet browser,
especially on a phone.
Right, and most of the time people are using is on these computers is on the internet. So I know they're not doing anything that's like actually heavily like computationally intensive.
The last time I fixed someone's computer, just fixed it, not a business, just someone's computer. I think the most complex software they had was the game environment that hosts whatever Steam, the Steam environment. I think that might have been the most complex software on their computer, other than the operating system. Granted, Steam is a sandbox and it might as well be its own operating system, and it's extremely complex and very stable. But, it's the vast majority of computer issues that I've encountered have been with configuration. And it's not like it's rarely even a use issue. Like, most people don't even go to places where they find trouble. Unless they've got a random computer user who's surfing porn at the wrong parts of the internet. But even that's largely been resolved for the average user. It's very easy to find adult entertainment on the internet without going to places that will corrupt a computer completely.
Right.
I had to throw that completely part of it. Because, if you go into a dungeon, you're going to get something on your shoes. It's the nature of dungeons. So, but even that's been largely resolved, and it's pretty easy to go surf the internet without being complete. You have to click OK when that pop-up says, hey, let me install this stuff. And
yeah, it's fairly easy to avoid getting hacked.
yeah, you just have to read that little prompt and say, "Wait, that doesn't seem like a good idea," or call your close friend who's good at this stuff, and they'll say, oh, "Yeah, definitely do not press OK," and that's like easy. But that doesn't. I haven't had that problem. I think the vast majority of people now know better. Like, I think that the average level of computer literacy is sufficient enough to stay out of trouble. And like the problems that we faced in our 20s when nobody knew better and firewalls were crap and people just like to go stick their internet dick in any old internet hole they could find. And I mean, I haven't seen a good old case of internet gonorrhea in a while because every computer system now has pretty good measures for protecting themselves. But I still don't see a need for freaking machine learning. I don't know anyone who's actually doing that.
Well, and I fear that for that exact reason, a lot of the stuff is going to be pseudo machine learning that just gives the appearance enough to trick stupid people who pay for machine learning like assistance. And it's like, if somebody's paying for a chat bot, I guess technically it's machine learning, but the way that they're framing these things as if, number one, as if they're going to be perfect. Because I've used like trading bots, and you actually have to do a lot of adjustment.
Yeah.
In terms of like, even on like word modeling algorithms, it doesn't just work. And then sometimes when it works, it stops working for some reason. And it's like the input is, you have to monitor it to ensure that it doesn't drift in terms of what the output looks like desired versus what actual is. So I'm just like, again, I love technology when it's useful and when it works, but a lot of the stuff that, well, in the process, they're destroying banks. So Silicon Valley Bank is receiving a run, and it funds a lot of tech startups. So that specific model of like, oh, I'm gonna raise $1 billion to fund this like algorithm that does a better job of filling in emojis is no longer going to be those types of capital raises are no longer going to be possible because these banks are failing so massively.
Man, like 13 years ago, about a friend of mine hosted a bot, and she was going to try and teach it. He was going to do the whole machine learning thing. And she invited me and several other people just to talk to it regularly. And maybe within 3 months, it could carry on decent conversations. But by month 6, it was just cursing all the time and swearing and telling people off. And it got taken offline shortly after that. Because even when given an opportunity to teach a machine to communicate, her friends who should have known better were like, yeah, let's teach this thing to swear, because that's a great idea. That's why I think that machine learning is that's one of the reasons I think machine learning is a terrible idea just to hand to anybody. It's like, yeah, let's create a bot that knows how to curse and use slang. Great. Now what does it do? Well, that's it. That's like the Rick and Morty robot that all it does is deliver pats of butter.
Yes, exactly. which is like our economy has become a bunch of those things. And it's hard to like pinpoint a specific time when it started to shift so much towards useless innovation, which sounds like a paradox. But it seems like, not to say the internet was at this point, it's like questionable how useful it even was.
Well, is it innovation or is it novelty? Because some things that are new can be dressed as innovative, but they might not really be innovative or even that novel.
Yeah, I mean, I guess innovative in the sense of like the way information is being presented and shared. Because yeah, hyperlinks are innovative in the way of like the way they're meant to be used is for provenance of information flow and like citation. But just for the sake of like directing traffic to places, it's like, yeah, it's definitely useful, but the way it's being used is not necessarily positive. So that's where, if it's being used by a bunch of people who are harming society, is that a net positive? I don't think so. Like the tool's useful, but the net, if like, it fluctuates in terms of, you know, it depends upon the users being more savvy and aware of the potential pitfalls, because if more people knew not to open emails that they aren't expecting, or know you didn't win that lottery that you didn't enter and things like that, it'd be a lot easier to have this tool be ubiquitously used and not have such a negative effect. But the previous generation is just so technologically naive that they are very vulnerable to like even the lowest level of attack. And that's why it's like the people who effectively control the economy are the ones that put it at the most risk technologically, as to why we can't move forward, as to why people are still writing checks, and you know, the banks open 9 to 5 or whatever, 8, like the shit that we're still doing from when our grandparents were transitioning into adulthood. Society shouldn't necessarily be doing, because we don't have to.
Yeah, I'd appreciate it if society would stop making me feel like I'm taking a late lunch when I don't eat at noon.
Yeah, shit like that. Society, most people don't need to be eating before noon, but yet they are, because breakfast. I need to eat my breakfast.
The most important meal of the day.
Yeah, it's what societal thing, breakfast. And they don't actually need to burn any calories. They eat breakfast and go fucking sit down. A lot of them. Like, yeah, if you're going to go out on a farm, go be a construction worker, I'm not talking about that person. I'm talking about most of America who fucking lines up at Starbucks or McDonald's, gets a goddamn egg and some meat fucking sandwich before 9 a.m., eats that shit, and then goes and sits down for 3 hours. That is dumb tradition. That's a stupid tradition that is meant for farm workers, not for desk workers. Like, yeah, the farm worker needs to wake up and eat fucking 6 eggs, some grits and biscuits and fucking sausage, because they're going to be out in the goddamn sun for the next fucking 8 hours. So those two things are not equal. And the idea that like Fourth meal, man? Why does anybody need fourth meal, let alone third meal, when they're sitting all day? So there's a lot of shit where then you get like Taco Bell adding on top of it and making people think that it's like not only okay to eat a fourth meal, that you're justified in eating a fourth meal just because you're awake, even if you sat down all fucking day. So it's like, I know how easy it was to get like a 2,000 calorie order and still be under like $20 at Taco Bell. Like you could probably get 2,000 calories for like $13 in some various combination of nacho taco burrito thing. And it's like, for somebody who needs 3,000 calories a day, that's not that big of a deal. But most people don't actually need 3,000 calories a day. And there's like a limited part of the population that are like doing a significant amount of work or have a metabolism that high that they need a fourth meal, let alone, like I said, a third. So that's where I'm like,
I've got an incredible metabolism, and I wouldn't dare do a fourth meal. That's like asking to stay up all night writhing in pain.
yeah.
Like, I'm serious. I've got a great metabolism, and I can't digest anything if I'm laying down.
Most people can't, because gravity is like a very essential part of digestion. So if you have undigested food and you lay down, a lot of it's just gonna pool there. And I learned this the hard way, eating stuff right before bed, laying down, and then throwing it up when I wake up because it didn't fucking digest. And I'm like, oh, I don't do that anymore because I'm an adult. And like, there's times when you drink and that type of eating, it like happens where after a while, I started to wonder how many times people, when they eat and puke, it's like just actually from them eating and like laying down before they had a chance to digest their food.
I bet that's a big part of it.
Yeah. But in the process, it's like those people who continue doing it also don't care. So they don't change their behaviors. Whereas like, even when I was drinking, it was like, I didn't like puking. And it's like, I'd rather not puke if possible. So then like, I realized, I can't drink and eat and then lay down within like an hour of doing that, or I'll definitely puke. Not to say that was the only thing causing, that reaction. But again, growing up, you change your behaviors.
Yeah, I mean, I got pretty good at not puking because I would just not drink too much. But I think the reason that I stopped drinking was more that I didn't like going to bars and having to yell at people to have a conversation. And I found that the people that I could go to a bar with or anywhere and have a drink and hang out with, I would have just as good a time hanging out with them, getting coffee, or at one of our houses, or getting a burger, or any number of things that didn't actually involve alcohol. Like alcohol was just something that was like, oh yeah, we can do this, but I would personally rather spend $6 on a burger than a drink. And I would much rather not have to yell at one of my homies to have a conversation. Like there's nothing exciting to me about that. That was actually my least favorite part of raves, was having to yell at somebody to have a conversation with them. But what can you do? I mean, at some point, you got to socialize. Sometimes places get loud. Not every place can be like an idealized, controlled environment. But, being an adult, we can make these decisions. I decide not to go to a place where I have to yell at people because I just can't enjoy that. Or a place that's so busy that no matter what you do, you're always in line or trying to squeeze through people. But at some point, that was fun. At one point, a lot of that stuff was really fun for some reason. And then the novelty wore off. I think the most.
Sorry.
And now we have like silent disco, which resolves the issue of having to yell at people. Kind of. But then you don't feel the music anymore.
But did those catch on?
Not really.
I know they tried.
I think the silent discos kind of all were on a path to start becoming interesting right as COVID happened. Like I said, I started to see silent disco packages appear in marketing campaigns. Like, you too can host a silent disco. This is how much it costs to buy this kit, and you can host a party of 1 to 200, 300 people, however many, whatever size you want to get. But then COVID happens, and club events evaporate. I remember one attempt to do it at a drive-in theater. I thought that was actually kind of cool. But I didn't go because pandemic life, and I wasn't about to just go do something frivolous for the sake of doing something.
Yeah, I guess I must be just out of the circles, the advertising parties, because I don't see anything locally. Like, I'll see big name artists putting out like that they're playing a show somewhere.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing. Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure it's happening. It's definitely happening, but it's more so, like I said, I must not be in the right. I mean, not saying I would go even, but
yeah. I mean, I generally.
I wonder how much of that stuff happens on Facebook.
Oh, considerable amount of it is still happening on Facebook. That's where I see most of these parties being advertised. But at the same time, I'm still not comfortable enough around groups of people to want to go hang out in a building with a bunch of sweaty people who are breathing heavy. And considering that I haven't gotten sick since the beginning of the pandemic, I'm actually, you know what, I was just reading about people like yourself and I who have yet to contract COVID or test positive for COVID. And it's like, we're a part of a very, very tiny group of humans at this point.
I figured the longer it went, the group would get smaller and smaller.
Yeah, it does. But they're
eventually NASA's going to show up at the door and be like, "Hey, we need to do some tests."
Yeah. Well, apparently there's a very, very small group of people who they're describing as having natural immunity or super immunity, who, despite high risk exposure or even testing, have yet to test positive for COVID. So, knock on wood and stuff, because boom, that means we're doing something really right. Like, really, really right.
I don't think I've had high risk exposure though. That's probably what it is.
Yeah. No, I've been really careful about everyone I go around, and as soon as I hear anything, it's like, I'm going to change my plans. Avoid kids. That's the big one. I don't go to any sweaty, steamy, heavy breathing parties. I think the last time I actually got sick was before COVID, was because I went to a bar. And then I ended up with a chest cold for a week afterwards. It was during the summer of vape lung when people were dropping and dying from vape exposure to what did they decide? Vitamin E and some other chemical.
Yeah. Well, I'm amazed at how healthy I've been able to stay in terms of like not getting any sort of respiratory or anything like throat, like no sore throat or anything. And it's like anytime anything starts, I just, treat it accordingly as if it was like a full blown incursion. And it usually just goes away. And a lot of it comes down to dryness and swelling and preventing like further swelling and alleviate or addressing the dryness, which is where I'm like,
gotta hydrate, gotta blow the nose.
Yeah, for sure. Even just the fact of like attempting to stay hydrated and like actually drinking water instead of just like thinking about it.
Oh, I thought about drinking a glass of water. That counts, right?
Yeah. But I'm definitely.
Yeah, the few times that I've woken up with a sore throat, it's because it got really cold in the night and I didn't keep the house warm enough and dried out. Or there was like a month ago, I found that the filter in my furnace was not seated properly, so it was letting dust through the system. And both times, just drank actually in my case, it was hot chocolate the first time. The second time around, it was like instant coffee. And then I took a shower and basically just gargled all the crap out that had like lined my sinus and my esophagus and my lungs and just got rid of all that dirt. And it's pretty crazy what can happen if you just like rinse out every day or if you don't even. Like days when I do a lot of yard work, I can definitely tell because like the next morning I will in the shower like blow my nose and it will have all sorts of brown specks in it. And I know it's not blood because I know what blood looks like. It's definitely dirt. And it reminds me when I would go to raves and you'd be standing there and then you wouldn't realize, but some jerk left the fog machine on like full blast and you've just got a lung full of fog juice. And for the next 2 days, like black stuff is coming out in your when you blow your nose. That's what it reminded me of. So I know that it's like the dust or the dirt from when I do some yard work or do some heavy cleaning or anything like that, really. Been really lucky. And that's actually one of the things that they were talking about in the article is that a lot of these people may just be very lucky. It may not be actual immunity. It might just be being very careful and avoiding scenarios where one would place themselves in a high-risk situation.
Well, and if it's like calculated, then it's not luck.
Yeah.
And they're going to have to acknowledge that the people that fucking took care beat the odds in terms of like, yeah, you can actively avoid something that is contagious if you do these things, like wear a mask or get a vaccine. And
wash your hands.
Wash your hands frequently. Yeah.
Use sanitizer if you can't wash your hands. Yeah, there's a list of things that I'm pretty sure we've both been doing this entire time that have contributed to the success of this current outcome. You know, it was yesterday, 3 years ago, that it all started. 3 years ago that it all began. That's when it officially became a pandemic. I guess it began in December or something, or November in 2019, but we only jokingly called it bat flu then, and now we know that it's
right between the bat flu and the official declaration.
Yeah. Snake pneumonia, bat flu, pangolin flu.
And it's something like that where if some new flu emerges within the next, year or two, I feel like people will have a less likelihood to respond, and it will be even worse. But it's like,
Oh, I mean,
that shit is so random.
have you read about the current version of bird flu that's circulating? It's spreading to mammals.
No, I did not
It's
know
all
that.
over the place. It's pretty bad.
Well, I knew that there was one circulating last year. I mean, I guess technically there's always one circulating, but a particularly virulent one where if farms got hit with it, they have to kill all their animals, or all their poultry.
Yeah, the H5N1 bird flu. It originated in Cambodia, and it's just like it's pretty bad. There's no like human contraction of it yet, but they've found it in quite a few different animals. So, like, I think it's definitely responsible for infecting birds. But let's see, where's this thing? Yeah. It's been reported in mammals in United States, Canada, but right now the risk is low.
Yeah, because some years it'll get bad enough where they'll suggest taking down suets and everything, and not putting out food and shit.
Yeah, I think 2 years ago they said it. 2 years ago it said don't put out bird seed.
Yeah, that was a shit year.
That was pretty rough. We had like 3 big old bags of bird seed just sitting there for a while. It's really sad. Well, I think that's like an issue of human and animal populations coexisting. We're going to find things that we didn't realize were there, and other things are going to happen as a result of our presence. I mean, I'm not saying that like birds got together and convened at the Avian Viral Center to develop a new virus to unleash. But
we should get right wingers to spread that one.
Oh shit. the AVC, the Avian Viral Commission, in June 2022 convened for the 32nd meeting of the AVC to announce the release of AH5N1. Oh man, we gotta make sure that hey, YouTube, this is clearly a joke. Okay, we're not trying to spread misinformation. No, I'm serious. This is not a.
Oh
this
yeah,
is
we're
not
totally
serious.
gonna get flagged.
This is totally a joke. Like,
they're gonna put COVID. If you want more actual COVID information, here's the CDC link at the bottom.
cdc.gov/COVID. Or if you're interested in bird flu, cdc.gov/flu/avian flu/inhumans.htm. Boom. Covered.
Oh, man. They haven't hit us yet. I wonder if it'll go on the replay, because I've definitely seen a few replays where they put that on there.
Yeah.
Where I'm like, we're definitely not out here trying to spread misinformation about COVID. If anything, when we ever talk about it, it's like what's happening in terms of people's responses. So to get hit with like the COVID misinformation tag or whatever, it's like, man, come on, go after some real people who are trying to deceive. Like, we're just shooting. We're not even like telling people to do anything.
No,
we're just talking about it. And further, there's people who are actively telling people don't get vaccinated and bullshit like that, and then they're not getting tagged, which is where I'm like, I see it happen. I don't necessarily report it, but for
maybe we should be, because somebody's reporting that we're spreading misinformation when we're telling jokes.
Yes.
I mean, how does... yeah, I mean, some of the stuff that we talk about, I couldn't make up. Straight up. I'm a creative person. You're a creative person. But some of this stuff is so weird. And I think that both of us have been exposed to too much, like, you know, science that we just couldn't come up with some of this shit. And actually, when we do come up with things, we tell the internet, you guys can run with that. Like, every time. So it's always been kind of confusing. Like, well, how are they actually deciding? Is this some, like, error of machine learning that's flagging us?
I mean, it kind of feels like it, yeah, because I know they must have some sort of multi-layered algorithm picking apart broadcasts for not just IP right infringement violation, but also the words. Like,
yeah, they do the real-time text, the real-time closed caption, so.
Yeah. Which is not available on our video yet. So I wonder, it must have to just like go through a filter before they make it available to ensure people aren't saying openly Nazi stuff or cursing. I have noticed less racism on YouTube in my feed.
I think cursing only matters if we want to monetize, because we drop F-bombs all the time. And
oh, yeah, but I think even things that have cursing in them, they're not going to promote them in people's feeds as much.
Oh, no, that's absolutely true. I was watching a YouTube show where they were making an effort to beep out anytime they cursed, and they even said, like, I'm really working on cutting this out because I don't want to get another knock on my account or something like to that effect. And it's like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Because this person's actually monetized. And they've got, 100,000 subscribers or more. And so that makes sense. They're at a very high level.
Well, and it's weird in terms of YouTube gets to still have the racy stuff and still have the cursing and still has nipples now. But also, you don't get monetized if you have any of those things. So there's like one thing bringing and keeping people here, and then everybody else trying to monetize around those things. And you can feel it. It's like everything that's not vulgar is trying to sell you something. And I'm increasingly seeing why I'm like listening to like people who curse, or like the content that I'm consuming is more vulgar in terms of like the language, but it's because they can't get monetized. So it's like not going to have some sort of fucking ad in it halfway through where they're like, here's some fucking cereal, you fucking idiot. You grown adult. You feel bad eating kids cereal. Here's some cereal for you. And it's like, oh, I can't. I get so angry when I get advertised at, and it's not even at me directly, in terms of like, it's so impersonal, but they try to make it seem like they're talking directly to you. That shit is so fucking infuriating to me in terms of like, as I'm 40 years old, it's so disingenuous and it's so condescending to me as a potential actual customer that it makes me hate them. Anytime somebody tries to advertise at me, it makes me hate them. So it's like, if advertisers were really in touch with what was happening, they would know that they're causing these types of reactions and would go out of their way not to drop a fucking ad in the middle of somebody's video. If I'm going to watch a video about like the movie Face Off, I want to hear about Nicolas Cage, not about some fucking cereal. You know?
I think this is a good time to point out that the Bexwalter Group is actually us, and we're not being like foisted on to YouTube by some shadow entity. It's just the name of our band. And this show is not sponsored in any way by any products. Although I can't even think of any products that I would want sponsorship from, actually, at this moment.
No, and that's another thing. Why are these people tying their wagons to these horses in terms of like cereal for adults? That's one. I see a lot of like the Magic Spoon. Yeah, fuck you, Magic Spoon. Yeah, we're not going to try to get sponsored by you because fuck you for interjecting your bullshit into content. I hate you now. I hate you, Magic Spoon. I didn't even know who the fuck you were until you bought some ad space and some shit I wasn't trying to hear about you. And then you made it about you. So fuck you, Magic Spoon.
Wait, that's the cereal's name?
That's the cereal company's name because they're trying to be like, oh, you don't want to feel like a kid? Well, you can buy cereal from us. It's healthy cereal.
I mean,
because you're going to eat this at some fucking wrong time of day anyway, so you might as well rot your teeth with Magic Spoon.
Does it contain a spoon that, like, when you eat the cereal, it releases vitamins or something?
No, they're not even shameful, or they're shamelessly playing on people's nostalgia. They're not even hiding it. They're like, we know you want to be a kid really down inside because childhood sucked. So we're going to sell you some cereal and try to make you feel better about yourself. And actually, you should probably be going to therapy. But here's some fucking stupid cereal instead. Magic Spoon.
Man, when I want to feel like a kid, I eat kids cereal. I think the idea of adult cereal that tries to tap into the magic of kids cereal is a losing proposition from the start. Because kids cereal is supposed to be jam-packed. And I mean like 95% stuff that adults don't eat.
I can't eat kids cereal because this shit hurts my teeth. I can't even do it if I tried. It literally hurts my teeth.
And then the top of your mouth is all ground into like...
all burnt for some reason.
Yeah.
Like, why is it burning my mouth when I'm eating cereal? Is this shit like some fucking... like grindstone or
it's the suet.
Pyre?
It's the suet that the that the birds put into their gizzard.
Man,
it's
Flintstone was the word. Yeah, fucking. It literally burns. It burns. Like, have you had Fruity Pebbles?
Not
just
recently.
The thought of Fruity Pebbles hurts my teeth. Tricks, man, Lucky Charms, all that bullshit. It just makes my fucking jaw hurt just even thinking about it. I couldn't
Cap'n Crunch.
I couldn't even look at that shit.
Dude, Cap'n Crunch is like the ultimate destroy the inside of your mouth cereal. That's like I imagine it's the equivalent of like sandpaper, but in edible form. Actually, I'm going to try that. Next time I need to sand down a piece of wood, I'm just going to get some Cap'n Crunch and grab a leather glove and crush it onto it and just use that.
Man, there's one cereal I will eat, and it's Honey O's, and it hurts. It still hurts. But at least I know it's going to hurt, and it's not going to, like, burn. It does, like, the sugar, it's so sugary that it does feel like the closest thing to, like, eating rocks that break as possible, but at least these rocks like taste good, and like I can actually taste something, and it doesn't just like burn my taste buds to fucking glass. So that's where I'm like, again, I can drink the cereal milk from O's, but like, have you tried, try drinking some cereal milk from Lucky Charms? That shit will burn. It's gonna burn. You'll burn your tongue out, Ralphie.
Exceptional radio.
Oh yeah, that was good stuff.